What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another draft breakdown video for the Detroit Lions. And today, we are shaking it up, moving from the final pick for the Detroit Lions in this year's draft to the first pick for the Lions in this year's draft. And it was via trade-up. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we are back with another draft breakdown video. You guys know I love doing these videos. And man, we are getting back on the right path. We had the Matthew Betts video. We had the Christian Mahogany video. And now today, we're changing it up. And we're going to the top pick in this year's draft. Now, I know I asked a few of you guys when we were on a live stream, like, hey, who do you guys want to see next? And we put a poll together, and Sione Vaki won that poll. But with how much that I've talked about him on Bleacher Report recently and some of our recent shows, so definitely go check those out. I've also shown some clips over here as well. The player that we're going to talk about today has, like, taken all of the Lions news, which does make sense because we have rookie minicamp, and he's taken the ball away already. So there's just a lot of hype around the player. Also on X, questioning, like, hey, this guy's long speed. There's question marks here. There's question marks there. It was the Lions' top pick in the draft. So obviously there's going to be a lot of talk about this player. And I was like, you know what? Let's waste no more time. Let's just dive right into it. Let's knock it out. So today, we are going to the 24th pick in the draft where the Lions traded up with the Dallas Cowboys to select, before the draft, my number one cornerback, Terrion Arnold. So if you guys have watched this channel at all up to the draft process, you know that I loved me some Terrion Arnold. Like I said, it was my number one cornerback, but honestly, that was coming into the draft, and I had watched a lot less than I actually did for this video. But I had a pretty good sense of the player. Certain games I ended up rewatching just to kind of put this video together, and there were definitely things that I opened my eyes to that I didn't maybe notice before, like, ooh, I didn't really know he had that, in a good way, and also in a bad way, like, okay, I see some inconsistencies here, but also when you watch games in order, you kind of get a sense of improvements and things that change within his game and kind of the role that he's playing. You find a little bit about his background. So a lot of new discoveries with this player since that time. But overall, I still love this player. I think the Lions got an absolute dog. And by the end of this video, when we go through some of the individual grades like we did with Christian Mahogany, you're going to see by how my grades play out, I think he's pretty good. And also, the trade value. I get it. There's question marks there in the past. The Lions won the trade value chart. Who did you walk away with, though? And to me, the Lions walked away with the number one cornerback of the draft. So I got no questions about it. And it wasn't just the number one cornerback, by the way. Okay, from the games that I had watched on guys like Jared Verse, for example, I had him above Jared Verse. I know Verse went above him in the draft. But for me personally, I thought this player was on a different level. Anyways, that's besides the point. Let's dive into this. Who is Terrion Arnold? 5'11" and a half cornerback that has also played the safety position, specifically going back to high school when he came out as a 5-star safety. Now, he hasn't played a ton at the college level. 2021, didn't see him that season, redshirt season. 2022, we did see him play as a freshman. And then this past season, which was his breakout season statistically with the 5 interceptions, in comparison to the year before, which he had 1 interception. Now, if you look at just the way that he measured in height and weight, it's very, very similar to what Brian Branch did last season in terms of height and also weight. It's almost identical, 189, so essentially the exact same size as Brian Branch. Also testing in with the 4.5 40, which I understand that has drawn some concerns, though we're absolutely going to dive into that, specifically the play speed, because you don't rank a player and you put the grade on his speed based on what's the 40 time. You watch the guy and you see how that plays out. So we'll talk about that. Ran the 4.5 40, which is all the talk. Just over 31.5-inch arms, which is good length. That shows up as a press corner and also at the catch point. 37-inch vertical, which definitely shows off the good explosiveness that he has. I think that shows off at the catch point as well. So even if you were looking at, for example, his 10-yard split, where he posted the 1.54 40, which is a strong number, but when you watch him, you see that short area burst and that short area quickness in a lot of different aspects of his game. He also had the 10.09 broad jump, a 6.69 3-cone drill, which really showcases that kind of agility and foot quickness that he brings. It opened up a lot of flexion for him. You saw him from the slot position. I mean, his movement skills from the slot were incredible. I thought reactive athleticism was off the charts when I had first went through this player. I still feel really good about that aspect of his game. Maybe a little bit less than I did before, but I still think that he's awesome in this category. And at that time, I was like, yo, the only guy that I think even compares was Nate Wiggins to any player I had watched. So I understand the 40 times are drastically different, but the reactive athleticism that he brings to the table, I think is outstanding. And you see some of that with that 6.69 3-cone drill. All right, with that being said, let's dive into this player a little bit. They just do defensive backs right. They put out good defensive backs, so we saw that last year with Brian Branch. The guy was NFL ready at 21 years old, which this player is also 21 years old. And to be starting out wide and having the production that he has, it's different. I understand that, sometimes that can be a little cliche to just talk about the competition level. You played SEC, see. But he legitimately played really good competition. That's not to say he was dominant against all competition or dominant every single game, but you can truly see really good receivers, technically speaking, in the way that he gets challenged and challenged in different ways, but also the different roles that he played in defensively: off-band coverage, zone coverage, slot, outside, sometimes rolling into safety alignments where he looked extremely natural. And then when you understand that, yeah, he has a safety background, it's like that does make a ton of sense. Plus, there are a lot of the aspects of being a former safety that I think carries over to his cornerback game, whether that be, first off, just discipline, how he plays the run, how he plays coverage responsibilities. You see the discipline, you see the ball skills, the innate ability to just find the football, win the balls in the air. The 5 interceptions kind of bear that out this past season, but you really do see it when you watch him. And also the comfortability when he's rolled into that position, open field tackling, the consistency and reliability within his technique in those spots. He brings safety aspects to the cornerback position in a really good way that carries over. Start with the reactive athleticism score first, and I still gave him a great grade here. And heading into the draft process, this is where I absolutely loved him. I thought he knocked out the critical factors, and that is really the main reason I had him as my #1 cornerback. Also some other reasons as well, being a 21-year-old corner, the willingness and run support. I love that. I thought it fit for the Lions. Plus, though, it was the fact that he knocked out every single critical factor, and one of those being the reactive athleticism that it carries. Now, I understand he ran the 4.5 40, and we're going to address those things, but a guy like Nate Wiggins, who ran a 4.28 40, you would expect that I would have a high grade in this category, which I do. I thought he was also great here, but Terrion Arnold was the one guy, maybe outside of Quinyon Mitchell, who I thought specifically was in the same ballpark as that player, while still also having the 4.5 40 to his name. And that really stems back to the foot quickness, the short area foot quickness. It's also the flexibility within his hips. It's the ability to play with knee bend. And what I love about this aspect is it gives him a lot of flexibility, but it specifically also shows him the fact that it's not just about him stringing movements together and playing really smooth and in a pattern that makes him look quicker than he is. It's his ability to really open up every aspect of his game, from dealing with different press releases, speed release, single step, a little bit more drawn out skip releases from the receiver, I should say, that he's going to see at the NFL. And he has the upside because of the foot quickness there and the reactive athleticism to be able to mirror match, I think, any movement off the line of scrimmage, as long as technically he is sound, because at times I thought they would break loose a little bit. Also, same thing from off-man coverage as well, his ability to react at the top of the route. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, because off-man coverage I had a little bit of a lower grade. However, I did think that his movement brought similarities, specifically at the top of the route, to me, to what I had seen with Carlton Davis recently from really diving into Carlton Davis. He's very reactive to angle changes with footwork through pedal and swivel. He has that ability to create swivel. He has deflection in the lower body, the loose hips, which are just incredible, but then also the overall body control that he brings to the table, right? Staying on his feet, keeping his feet underneath him. You rarely ever see this player get caught lunging. I thought occasionally, like there was rare occasions where his footwork would break a little bit loose off the line of scrimmage in press, or maybe he get a little bit overly aggressive, or maybe his hips would roll a little bit early, and we'll talk about all of those things. But just having the body control to be able to react to movements, open his hips, redirect in awkward positions, that is an area that I think he is great, and that's still the grade that I ended up here with. Now, I think he's a little bit more fluid than Chris when you talk about some of the tight footwork and off-man coverage, and again, this scenario where I think at times the technique just breaks a little bit loose on him is being in these off-man coverage situations. We saw that against LSU, for example. We'll talk about that a little bit more. You also see the pacing and half-turn coverage here against Kentucky. He plays with great control and leveraged footwork from the slot. Now, honestly, this shows up with the slot flexibility where he can usually play to safety help or play from inside outside, but it also shows up as a wide corner as well to play from outside inside. Maybe it's quarters and he wants to squeeze it to the safety. Maybe he's just playing with middle field safety help and he's squeezing that direction. Most of the time, that's what teams are going to do, is they're going to play to their help, and the Lions have specifically over the years brought up the importance of schematically, hey, we have to understand where our help is, whether that's sideline, whether that's linebacker dropping into the hole, whether that's safety, whatever it is, we have to understand where our help is, and we have to really play into that, especially when you're in man coverage. Lions want to get to man coverage heavy, which he was last season. That's not to say he only did that. Certain games they play a little bit more zone heavy, especially when he was in the slot. But that's an area where we've seen that control, we've seen the leverage footwork, and we've seen the ability to pace in those positions. He has easy acceleration and bursty speed with leg over movement laterally. That lateral movement I thought really showed up from the slot, but it's also that ability to create real burst with the leg over technique and also just really create a lot of acceleration to those spots. I think that his short area burst is incredible, and I think that shows up a lot more than what that 40 time is his ability to close ground in a hurry, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Strong pacing in the hip of a receiver. Saw that against Georgia, had some really good examples here. Of course, you had the one with Lad McConkey, for example, where you had the pass breakup, but again, playing into safety help from inside or outside, for example, like quarters, as we touched on. Now, he will get thrown off in press versus a two-way go, overly over top, and again, this showed up against Georgia. I thought every game brought different challenges. Now, there were certain games where he was just dominant, right? Like, I thought LSU was his best game of the season. Thought he was dominant in that game, and he went to work against Malik Neighbors for a lot of that game, and early in the game, it was, different receivers who aren't coming out this year, for example, but he got a lot of different matchups. He handled Malik Neighbors, and he held his own for the majority of the game. I thought he played his best game of the season. He had other games against Tennessee, a lot of off-man coverage where it was just pretty inconsistent. That being said, though, where you get the inconsistencies really is when he has to deal with a two-way go, which is what you're typically going to see as a wide cornerback, where he could just get a little bit overly aggressive, working over top. Talk about some of that reactive athleticism. But he does carry that footwork. He carries that control, specifically in the lower body for the slot work. He rarely ever seems like he's even crossing his feet in those kind of movements. He handles whip routes well and complex breaks. It opens up, again, that slot usage. He has reactive footwork, and again, he's not just stringing movement together. He has the footwork to swivel and the hips to mirror over a stem and through the press. So from off coverage, press coverage, ability to get depth quickly. He just carries great reactive athleticism. That's a critical factor, and he knocks it out of the park to start with. Now, I want to talk about his ability to transition, because this was the area, actually, I believe I had the highest grade on the player. Not necessarily a critical factor, but I believe I had the highest grade on the player coming into the draft. And my goodness, once again, as I continue to watch and watch, I'm like, yo, this guy's incredible in this area. I understand why I gave him such a high grade. Initially, it only took me a few games to see it. Watching, you're like, yo, it's awesome, the transition ability. Now, with that being said, he has those explosive hips to stick with speed releases out of press. So he can match up with pretty much every release type that I think can get thrown at him at the NFL. And again, we're talking about different speed receivers. I thought Anais Smith, who ran a 4.47 40, handled him pretty well. We'll talk a little bit more about that straight speed. But we need to talk about explosiveness, the transition explosiveness too. I'm in press, let me open my hips, turn and run with receiver, or also, 45 degree. Let's get lateral with the receiver. That explosiveness in his transition is consistent. It's consistently explosive against every matchup. We'll talk more about seeing more diverse release packages, because here you kind of that fake release from the receiver, and you could see him start to open up a little bit on the play and get caught behind, but yet you get to see that explosiveness here in the hips, the foot over, and he oftentimes can either get in the hip or get on top of the route entirely and control from that spot. He is so explosive out of the press into the stem of the route. We saw that against Tennessee and some of that burstiness. Now, he will need to improve some of that transition footwork from slot to close airspace in short areas. Really, I say from slot, but this is just in short areas in general, is that I thought at times, again, he'd just be a tick late in these spots. He maybe just need to speed up his footwork a little bit, limit the processing. Being able to anticipate route breaks and also release packages was an issue for me early, and I think this is sort of an example of that as well. When you're in those short area situations, when the ball's going to get out quickly, you're at the 3-yard line, they put you in a slot man-to-man, we need to speed those up, or we have to really focus on, we have to close airspace here, because the ball is just getting out too quickly, and I thought that happened a few times. However, he also carries that recovery swivel in a trail position, which is super impressive. It's almost like the lean that he also brings at the top of the route. Certain cornerbacks thought did as well, DJ James out of Auburn, but it was also that ability to swivel in trail. It was natural. Receivers got him over top, but then able to navigate his way back into the play, dealing with route breaks, but able to navigate back into the play, carry and maintain speed. We'll talk about the tracking speed, the discipline to not necessarily just look back for the ball until he gets back into position, but then also being able to swivel and mirror from those positions. Not an easy thing to do. He brings that with the lean, with the bend, with the burst, and also the quick feet in those spots. The issue that I had about his transition just in general, and this will show up in press as well, is when he would open up a little bit wide. I thought this showed up against LSU specifically, against guys, Brian Thomas was there, Malik Neighbors, they had some really good receivers, Dylan was there, but it was the fact that he would open up a little bit wide, transition would open up, and they would create space on drag routes, because his first explosive depth would be, 45 degrees, they could flatline it, and then he would ultimately have space created. And we'll talk about the long speed, because I'm not here to argue that he has great long speed, because he does not. So when you have that aspect and then you get caught behind on the play, that obviously doesn't help you unless you're playing into help. High level ability to dial down at the top of the route and sync with wide receiver footwork. This is something something that I thought a guy out of Georgia this season did really well, Kamari Lassiter. He does this really well as well. I think it's a gift. Since I've started watching cornerbacks, this is one of those things that I've always kind of looked for, is how I felt about a cornerback's ability to just naturally dial down, sink at the top of the route. It's like we talk about receivers beating the drum. It's like that at cornerback, but it's just being natural. It doesn't necessarily have to be anticipation driven, like he was expecting that was going to happen, so he sat down on the route. No, but more so just being able, I'm able to play in your hip, sync my footwork with you, but at that same time that you in a plant break and you know when you want to, and I have to react to that. Bringing that reactive athleticism and that transition ability to sync it and essentially dial down at the same rate that receivers can, I think that's a special ability that he brings that I think only a few cornerbacks that you'll constantly see can bring that aspect to the table. And I think he's one of those guys that did bring that to the table, that high-level ability to dial down on top of the route and sync his footwork with the receiver. Now, this specifically shows up in terms of syncing the footwork with the receiver in terms of consistency when he's dealing with receivers that long speed-wise are a little bit more in the average category, or he's ending up playing it to help. If he's on an island against a very fast receiver, I think at times you get inconsistent. We saw it against Ladd McConkey, just inconsistent pacing from outside inside, pacing of the stem of the route, maybe trying to protect a little bit over top. Sometimes it'll throw off like losing vision for FBI, things like that. We'll talk about that. But he avoids beating the drum in phase with the route, getting in your hip, and that ability to sync, mirror, and just stick in your hip throughout the route. Once he gets in your hip through the press, he can ride that through the rest of the play, as we'll talk about here a little bit later. Carries the knee flexion for half turn to pedal swivel. So again, getting in a half turn, working a pedal, get back in a half turn. He carries that knee flexion, and a lot of times he can play with the patience, where as long as he's not rolling his hips early, he can react to your hip movement, and he can play through that and kind of continue to just work with the route throughout the route, dealing with deep dig routes, dealing with crossing routes, those kind of things. He carries the hips to also open up on flat routes at the top of the route. For example, we saw that against Ole Miss, right? He could just get flat at the top of the route because of his hips. He has the hips like a receiver to flip himself open, say, okay, I'm in half turn, then all of a sudden the receiver breaks an out route, being able to open my hips and then work over top, my leg over technique, while also carrying some burst to that. If he's able to stay in phase, or he's kind of working down on top of the route, he has that ability to open up flat. It's when more so he's getting over top of the route, they break underneath, then he just plants and goes the other direction. But if he's in phase, he can plant and get flat. Again, the play speed, which is all the talk, understandably so. To me, though, play speed is much more important than what's your 40 time, because it's how fast are you when you're on the field. And truly, this is what I took away. So limited long speed will cause him to be late to pass off deep crossers to a safety. So again, there's one of the things there. For me, I think it's limited long speed. He's not the fastest player with ease vertically, right? You'll see certain receivers, it looks like it's easy for them to stack corners. It's not easy for him to just run by guys or stick in a receiver's hip that's just racing down the field, especially against one of the faster receivers. So because of that occasion, I think you'll have him lose vision of, okay, they're running two deep crossers here. He's trying to stick with this one receiver. Here comes the other crosser, and you see the awareness so strong in his game that I didn't realize before, and we'll talk about that. I walked away from this kind of blown away. The other things I expected, I was blown away by his awareness. I was like, yo, this player is a lot smarter than what the grades that I had on him, than what I expected from a young player, the versatility. Did not anticipate this was going to be such a high grade for me, and I walked away like I'm super impressed. But this is one of the areas where that kind of pulls back, because I think he's working so hard to keep vertically in those spots. It's not just easy for him to be in those positions. Also, you'll also see it displayed on fast motion. So fast motion, receiver comes across. We do this with Khalif, for example, and they'll run like a speed out or a flat. And he's got to race across the field, stay on top of the route, and then dive on it. And while he carries that short area burst, you're just asking him to race across the field and stay in connection with that receiver and then have that recovery acceleration. He doesn't really carry that necessarily. So, for example, you saw it on the Kentucky touchdown that he gave up. I think at times he can kind of get him beat to the corner, though he's very disciplined. It rarely happens. But it's happened, I think it was against Georgia, where he ended up giving up the corner on run support. That's an area that you'll see. You'll also, I think you see it more so on being in special teams units. Camera roll against Middle Tennessee State, we saw, for example, okay? He would kind of get caught behind as the rep continued to play through, and he'd get caught kind of having to grab the hips to pull himself back at the play. We saw that against Middle Tennessee State, for example. Or again, full field recovery for deep crossers, especially if he's not in phase immediately on the play. So, just terms of a long speed, don't think that he's great in this category. He's not great in this category. However, he plays to me at a very good speed overall. What helps you play faster? Things like this. Excellent feel for passing off routes in man coverage and handling stacks specifically, whether that's from a press alignment or also from a man coverage alignment. He handled well versus Dylan Bell against Georgia, for example, who reportedly ran a 4.38 40 time in practice, just to kind of put that into context. Here you'll see him run with Xavier Worthy, and you can see that, again, that long speed may be taken off guard here. He thought he was going to pass this off, but you can see the long speed. There's a little bit of separation towards the top there, but it's also the fact that he keep himself leveraged to get over top. He has a nice transition. He can also kind of weave throughout these half-turn looks to really help himself stay on top. And then again, those proactive angles and that burst out, usually he closes airspace pretty well. He carries that bursty 10-yard split. We could see it again on special teams, field goal block units, where I think there was actually one time where he really affected a field goal and it was missed on the play. He plays faster with angles to the ball and closing routes with discipline. His angles at the catch point, but also his angles in recovery. His swivel, again, and trail technique plays a lot faster because you're not getting as much false movement. He plays with very proactive angles and a lot of limited false movement angles, which you love, and that's in trail, but it's also just being on top of the route as well. I think that discipline, also to not look back and try to find the quarterback, find the ball, but instead just kind of playing through the receiver's eyes. He maximizes his speed through the angles that he plays with. And also, we got to see some of that play speed on his kick return touchdown. On his one kick return, I believe that I think only had this one kick return, took it back for a touchdown, but because of an offensive, I believe it was a holding, it was called back. And you're like, yo, that guy's dynamic. By the way, keep that in mind. The ability to make plays with the ball in his hands like this, that shows up when he takes the ball away as well. And you know, some teams really love that ability to say, hey, once he takes the ball away, he's going to go make something happen with that. So now let's get into the specifics here. Let's start off as a press cornerback because this was the area specifically that I liked him the most. I thought he was great, pushing an elite grade for me as a press cornerback. If honestly some of the technique things were just more consistent, probably would have pushed him to that category. Because as I said, the reactive athleticism there, the stabs are there, the body control is there, the footwork is there. There's so many aspects of this that I absolutely love. And his ability to match up against different release techniques against, hey, he's stacked up or he's not stacked on the play or he's on the line of scrimmage. I think the upside here is going to be incredible. However, I think that there's specific games where you see things kind of break loose a little bit, or there's certain examples that you didn't love. But honestly, as the season went on, I just thought there was a lot of aspects that he kind of dialed in. Like, you just saw a lot more in terms of like, okay, there's just a lot more consistency in his game. And then randomly you get things that pop up. You're like, I don't love that. So he's got to adjust from that. But I think that speaks to the mental toughness because as the season went on, it just felt like he was getting better and better. Here would come a new challenge, something you didn't see before. It's like, oh, he's struggling there. And then he kind of work it out and then you wouldn't see it again. For me as a press corner, balanced avoids lunging on press stabs. If you know me for press corners, first thing I look for is where's the balance and also are you lunging? Okay, how well do you play balance when you're in press situations? I love it about Gonzalez. I love it about this player. Plays with a ton of balance. Now, there's rare occasions where that can kind of fall away, but it is rare, okay? It is extremely rare for him to be unbalanced, not in position where his feet are underneath him, for him to react on the play. Now, he needs to avoid those occasional two-step hops for position. So here, against Georgia, using this two-step hop. Now, he was able to get back into this using some of the length, using some of the strength there, some of the play strength that he's able to carry. He was able to get back into this, though this reception was made, which is a tough grab. But it's also, you know, just this little example, you're like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that specifically. But he plays with squared hips. He mostly doesn't declare his hips, and he also plays with a very adaptive first false step, which is huge as well. At times, he doesn't even utilize his false step, depending on the release type. I thought, here's the interesting thing. Early in the season, I thought, man, single step releases felt like he couldn't anticipate. Like, he didn't know what to do when a receiver just used a single step release, and he was falling behind. Then as the season rolled on, I was like, oh, he's handling those with ease. Like, it just didn't seem to be a thing anymore. Noticed early season, stopped noticing it as the season rolled along, that single step releases were any problem. He's got limited playing experience at corner, but when you watch him, the fact that you're able to watch and continue to see things that just don't show up anymore, that's what gives me so much optimism, my willingness to bet this player is going to be big time as a press cornerback. And it starts there with squared hips, not declaring, a nice false step, improved single step releases. Again, USF, I thought he had some inconsistencies there, but that was so early in the season. Creative releases or unique releases that were like outside of the norm, that I thought would throw him off at time. His footwork, his anticipation to it, would typically mirror everything that you could ask of him. That being said, though, I thought the anticipation, the footwork, it would get thrown off. You'd start to see him kind of rolling his hips early in the season where guys would just throw him off balance. Now, I thought partially this popped up a little bit towards the end there. You saw Georgia, and I didn't love it, where he was rolling his hips a little bit early. He's being a little bit overly aggressive to try to get on top of the route and take control of the route. And then, because of his positioning, he'd get pushed off. And they were just snapping off early curls. They weren't running it like your 10 yards, plant, come back to the ball. It wasn't as like to the textbook, but it was instead like, okay, I got him off balance, boom, I'm going to press off, and I'm just going to sit down. And that started to pop up against Georgia, for example. But the creative releases, I think as he saw more and more looks, different release types, he just is super adaptive to those things. He has a disciplined response to the core. He's not looking at your head or at your step movement. He's not necessarily focused on that. It's more about reading through the core of the receiver, so you don't get a lot of unnecessary like lateral steps step here, like, oh, he's taking a huge lunge here, because it's not necessary for him to do so, because the guy's not giving him a movement. I think it also helps him as a jammer as well. He handled Ladd on line of scrimmage. So if you watch him play Georgia, Ladd McConkey, right? High second round pick, one of the top picks in the second round, I believe. Ladd McConkey, every time he had to press him, thought he handled him off the line. And that, I bring that example up because I thought Ladd, as quick as he was, as shifty as he is, he uses all this footwork and foot movement, but his core's not moving. And because of that, this guy handled him. Terrion Arnold handled him at the line of scrimmage. He was balanced, he was composed, and he just stuck right in front of him, not buying on any kind of eye candy. He stays in the seat through transition, opening his hips. Another thing against Ladd, Ladd's a little bit taller. He's able to sit underneath. He's able to just kind of stay in his chest. Also, he likes to drop his hands and reset them underneath. You don't oftentimes see press stabs that are high. Typically, he's getting into kind of that chest area because he drops him down throughout the transition spot. When his pacing sticks early, he can ride it through the rep. So as I said, if the press is clean and he gets into your hip early on the play, he's going to ride that throughout the rep, and he's going to be able to maintain kind of staying in phase throughout the entirety of the rep. Again, using Ladd McConkey, for example, here you saw it on this pass breakup that he had on this dig route, which was showed when he was drafted as one of his highlights. He will avoid unnecessary lateral movement, I touched on. However, some of the knocks here, it would come loose early in 2023 without the footwork to connect. Okay, so some of the hand usage, I didn't think his footwork was always balanced underneath him, and he was kind of throwing hands. I thought occasionally he would rush his hands. I think there's things within his hand usage at the line of scrimmage that definitely can be improved upon. And that was one thing, for example, specifically early in the season. I thought that he would rush his hands early in the season, and he'd be overly reactive and lose occasionally, which would also cause him to roll his hips early, and he'd be playing off balance. He wouldn't be playing within himself. He wouldn't play with the positioning that would truly make sense for him to throw punches. And at the same time, it would also allow guys to snap off breaks a little bit early because he just start to roll over. You saw this from off-band coverage early in the season, and then press coverage early in the season, where he would roll over his hips just a little bit too early. Not necessarily that he was declaring, like he wouldn't declare on a single step, but it was like once it was pushed vertically, he would roll before kind of sticking with it and staying disciplined a little bit early in the season, and that would allow opportunities to kind of snap off routes on. He uses a false stab to control the release and stick on top, which I loved. You saw that against LSU, that false stab. It's very balanced. He's not lunging on his stabs. He's not reaching for his stabs. When they don't connect, which a lot of times they don't, sometimes he uses the false one just to kind of take control of the route, because as soon as he throws that stab, but he's also balanced and he's not lunging, all of a sudden he has the receiver react to it. Slows down the release, then he can sit on top of the route, and that's what he loves to do. He loves to play on top and in control of the route. I think there's just times where he needs to manage the balance between wanting to play on top of the route and also saying, okay, let me just get in the hip of the guy. I don't need to control this. Let me stick in his hip, because he has kind of that in-between where occasionally he'll fall over top of the route. Then he's trying to get contact, and again, they can break off routes, or they can push him, and then they can break back to the ball, and it's like there's separation there. But that's where he likes to play. He likes to control the route early. However, he's able to use kind of those false stabs to play balanced, force receiver to kind of slow his release, and then he's able to step back on top of it and take control of the route. We saw that against LSU. He paces the stem of the route once transitioned on top. We saw that against Ole Miss, kind of the point that I'm just making there. Now, finding contact into transition can be late. We saw this specifically against Kentucky. I think some of the short area situations can just improve, specifically from the slot. Here against Kentucky, I thought his hands were maybe a little bit slow here. He kind of just shielded him off, got his hand in his chest, shielded him off on the play, and that happened. Now, he has pretty instinctual hands, like during the transition. Let me get my hands. Let me shoot here. Okay, I kind of lost it. Let me shoot my hands. And his footwork typically tends to move with that, but I just think that at times it can become a little bit predictable, and it also can at times not be as ready, or a little bit like he doesn't necessarily shake up the tendency, I don't think, enough of his press hand usage. Like, he's not kind of throwing off a receiver like, I didn't expect that. It's more so like playing into, okay, you would expect a punch here, he's going to give you that punch there. And I think some of that savviness can kind of come with just more time. It's a contact at the top of the route for control. However, he will find contact without balance to get knocked off the top of the route. Taller pad level, less bend in lower body, just lacking some of that attention to detail. I think even off-band coverage, you've seen in his pedal at times where, you know, he kind of pop up and he was like standing straight up at times. I think sometimes he'd lack that attention to detail at the top of the route where he wouldn't continue to sit down. He could transition while sitting in the press. He sits in the press with a low pad level, but once it kind of opens up, at times I think I saw as he was trying to gain control of the route, he would start to kind of break loose and kind of pop up a little bit. Then he would lose any kind of strength and positioning that he had, and that's when he started to lose contact balance at the top of the route. However, as I said, he initiates that contact at the top of the route for control, which I do love, because as an undersized corner, I don't want to say he's undersized, but he wants to take control of that route early in the play and really control the rep. This also, you can make the case, shows up on, like, okay, let's say it's a 3rd and 5 and he's playing the sticks. More, let's say it's 3rd and 10. He's playing on the sticks. He has this awareness. He is very disciplined to say, I'm going to sit myself down. I'm going going to create a posture. You are not going to be able to necessarily, like we do, right? We'll run deep curls to the sticks and position and just kind of like contested grab. He's not going to let you do that. He's going to park himself down and say, you're not going to make that happen on me. But where that can cause issues, of course, is the fact that if it's not that and they kind of break off it, then he gets caught kind of in an awkward position to react to it. Now he's kind of get forced a little bit to grab, and it's a little bit slow in terms of the transition. But for the most part, that's really not much of an issue because typically he's playing the sticks, or maybe that's in kind of like red zone situations, for example. Rushing his hands for control gets him knocked off. Again, we saw that against Georgia. He's sticky in the stem, and he denies the back shoulder here against Mississippi State. The stickiness that he carries the entire phase of the route and the amount of reps that you see of this gives you the optimism like, yo, this guy could be awesome. He's so young. He was so adaptive as the season went on. He improved in certain areas. His game felt like it was just getting deeper and deeper on what he could be asked to do. And then you see the routes where he would just stick in the hip, then control phase, whether that was getting on top of controlling the route with his hands, or whether that was the instant and kind of trying to press towards the sideline, or whether that was I just want to stick in your hip. And then that ability, as I said, that really special ability to just sink at the top while mirroring your footwork, that ability to play in phase so naturally is beautiful. And I think that's a hard thing to ask, to say, can he bring all phases of being a press man cornerback that can live in phase and consistently win there? And there's so many examples of him doing that. And I thought Mississippi State was a great example because it was a back shoulder throw that he essentially just denied any opportunity of because there was no airspace at any point on the route, so there was nowhere to go with the football. And he's physical. He wants to take control of the route. There's nowhere to go with it. He can quickly create depth in pedal, as I touched on. That opens up so much flexibility and what he can do off the press. He sticks with stutter releases upfield here against LSU. So again, you're starting to see different release types. He's able to stick with those. He has the pacing and the hip control. His feet stay underneath his pads for that consistent balance. He controls routes on the vertical push transition. Have that issue where he'll get a little bit over aggressive, I think, to overstep and get control of that route. And you can kind of see the same issue, I think, in a way sort of show up like here against Georgia on his vertical route where he's attempting to squeeze this route, which he does really well, really good angles. So he closes airspace like that. So he wants to squeeze the route from the outside in. And he's not taking a lot of false movement here, but then the receiver leans into that and they separate off. But he's also working so hard to get vertically on the play that he ends up slipping on this play. But his ability to create easy depth, he has so much upside as a press corner, and he's also really good there now. I think he's pressing an elite grade. I think he could be special as a press corner through every phase if you continue to dial in the consistencies there, because, you know, receivers are going to find the way that he's losing, and they're just going to say, I'm just going to do that over and over. Just keep throwing that technique at him. But he's been adaptive, so I'm buying into the upside here. As an off-band corner, I thought he was a plus player here, but I didn't love him in this area. I think this needs the most work out of every coverage technique, even though they did it more than, say, zone coverage. I just think that this is the area that needs a lot more work from me. And it starts with this. The top of the route footwork can be pushed back, and he can play unbalanced. For attention to detail, felt like it would break loose. Some of the footwork would break loose. You'll see that in some of the plant and drive that gets a little bit slower. And you'll also see it at the top of the route where his footwork isn't really there, and he'll get pushed back. He's not really in a balanced position. May need to speed up his footwork in short yard situations, as we touched on. Now, here's what I do like. He plays with active eyes early. So he does a nice job of very early on the play, reading the stem, the pace of the stem, and saying, let me find the quarterback now. He's getting off the line slow. He's pressing up a little bit slow here. Whether that's I'm passing it off, like he has a real ability, and again, back to awareness, which I just ended up loving it, is where if I'm passing off, say I'm the wide corner, and if the number one receiver out wide does a little drag route underneath, and I need to pass that off to the inside defender and drop out, he has an ability to immediately off the release recognize what that's going to look like and just say, go. He immediately communicates that. He's so fast to read that. So that speed and the active eyes early allows him to quickly say, receiver's doing this, quarterback, what you doing? And that's very quick, especially from the slot. And of course, that opens up occasions for screens, but we'll talk about that a little bit more to kind of dive on those. He's ready and reactive from plant and drive footwork from half turn. I think he's much more consistent here, plant and drive, top of the route transition, breaking on the football, than he is when he's squared up. I think his footwork just breaks loose way too consistently. But in half turn, he really has the movement skills and reactive athleticism to stop, start, to twitchiness, to burst, but also the top of the right, the ability to get his feet planted. Occasionally he'll get kind of the skip into it, which I don't love, but when he doesn't do that, he does carry enough bend where he can say, okay, plant and drive back to the football. I don't know that he's elite in some of the bend categories for knee bend, for example. I think sometimes you'll see it break loose when he's trying to like turn a corner. So I think that can kind of hurt him a little bit here. But overall, if the footwork's dialed in, he's much better from that spot. As of right now, he has an explosive start ability. We saw that against Ole Miss. I think he can also really improve his anticipation when the blind spot is attacked to drive on routes and cut off crossers. We saw that against Texas A&M. So this is one thing that's just kind of a staple for me for anticipation for him. It's off-man coverage. I just think that he needs better anticipation in a lot of different aspects. But it's also reading receiver body language. Now, again, SEC receivers, they're legit. So a lot of these guys were really nice route runners, and they wouldn't give you easy tells. Like, it wasn't like they were clearly rising up on the play and you're like, oh, the break's coming here. They wouldn't give you that. They wouldn't necessarily change speed, and you really had to stay disciplined up until the route break. So great job by a lot of those receivers. However, you just didn't see enough anticipation. You didn't see enough anticipation due to the fact that he doesn't constantly play with eyes that balance between receiver and man. It almost doesn't happen at all, especially out wide. He almost exclusively just watches his man and not the quarterback, so he almost gets no intel from a quarterback drop type outside of occasionally in the slot, outside of occasionally it happening very early on the play. So he gets no intel from there usually. And then there's also the aspect that he's just anticipation like, oh, he's starting to press my blind spot. Maybe he's going to break on this route. Let me kind of speed up my process and start to be prepared for that. He just kind of works with it, and he's too reactive in these spots where he's just reacting to, until I see it, I'm not moving. And that's where you get like, okay, they'll hit him on, they'll hit his blind spot, and they'll tack with an outbreaking route. Or it's like they press up with that last second step, and then it's like, oh, you're expecting the plant and drive back to the ball. But he doesn't play with that expectation. He kind of just lets it press him, and then he reacts once the break is made, but he's not getting ahead of the play. So you don't get plays where he's jumping over routes on off-man coverage. You just don't get those anticipation types of plays. He plays with controlled movement, though. This is back to that body control for double moves, fake screens, for example. I don't think there was an example I saw where a fake screen happened, or, kind of where they'll kind of stalk block and then they'll take off. You just didn't see any of those where guys actually ran by him. Constantly stays on top of those. He plays with the discipline of a safety, but also it's that body control. He can easily just work open his hips and just turn and run. He has the burst, he gets back into the play, and it's like he's just not giving that up on the play. He's also very assignment sound. So if he's in a situation where he's playing underneath coverage, he may crank up his aggressiveness to dive. But if he's over top, that aggressiveness is not going to get cranked up rarely ever. He's making sure that you're not beating me over top. And obviously they're going to be hit and miss with that, but for the most part, leads to good things. But again, the downside is, for example, on screens, he's often late to pull the trigger. He's more so like, I'm going to get in position. Let me hold. Okay, I need outside leverage. Let me get position of this block. Let me control there. That's mainly what it is. The occasions I saw you would see him dive on screens, for example, like this one, is he's zone coverage underneath, doesn't have the overtop responsibility, so he has the ability to just dive. But if he's not in that spot, you're not usually going to see him dive and break on the ball, so I don't think you're going to see a ton of that from off-man coverage. He also can be a little bit high-pedaled in off-man coverage when he's squared, but he can pace the route. Now, the thing here is that I thought he improved. I had these notes early, continuing to watch, I thought more and more it was very consistent that he was getting out of being in a high pedal. It just wasn't as noticeable. That being said, though, I still just thought it was more consistent technically when he was in some of those half-turn spots to plant and drive back to the ball.
And there's no question that he has the footwork to pace himself, and here was some inside safety help. He gets a little bit aggressive on this out route. I don't have a huge issue here, but on a play like this, you can see the footwork, the ability to dial down and really pace himself, though he, to me, is much more consistent here when he's able to stick in phase and really play through the receiver versus giving space or playing out of phase. But in a spot like this, even though he's mirroring the footwork, you can see that he's not anticipating that it's going to attack his blind spot. He slows himself down and gets on top of the route, but he's not in a position to really protect his blind spot.
He also has a tendency to just give too much space. So whether that's short area, like in a slot, where it's like, hey, we need to speed up this footwork, or we really need to close space here, it's the same thing that you'll see on early downs, where it's like, yo, we're just giving too much space. Tennessee, to me, had the most success against him. I thought this was a big aspect of it, where he was not only just not anticipating the route was going to break, but it was also the aspect that he was just giving a lot of space. I mean, you're on the boundary side. I understand that he's the wide receiver, but he's just giving too much space, and he's not in a position to actually drive on the ball, especially when he's not anticipating the drive on the football. He's just playing on top. Tennessee did it like not three straight, but they did it like 3 times where they just ran like comeback routes or curl routes on him, and he wasn't even in a position to make a play on the football. He made the tackle, but he wasn't in a spot to actually give himself a real chance to actually make a play on the football in those spots. Now, he plays, as I said, similar control to lower body to a guy like Carlton Davis when he's squared. I think that he has that ability at the top of the route, that transition ability that's similar to Carlton, not necessarily some of the anticipation to drive, but definitely the footwork and kind of the transition ability is what I'm focusing on there. Yeah, I thought he was very disciplined when he was able to get in a route runner's hip, but again, like, hey, I'm anticipating, oh, this is going to be a crossing route. He's breaking it this way, he's probably running a cross route to get on top of it. I just didn't think he was doing enough to anticipate, and more so, again, he was relying on being too reactive in those spots. He can mirror and read hips. This is probably the best thing that I like in terms of just reading body language, was his ability to read a receiver's hips and kind of work on top of that. He has a reactive athleticism to get laterally, so his ability to see a receiver start to kind of lean one direction, or his hips would start to open, especially if they weren't as disciplined, and he could kind of step over top of those. I thought that was the aspect that he was his best from anticipating where a route was going to go from off-man coverage situations. Pulling his hips early was a problem early in the season, as I touched on, but I thought that cleaned up as the season continued on. He also can play with predictable movement to press and open his hips. Again, we saw that against Tennessee, where you could kind of press him at the top of the route and you could have him just open his hips. So he played with kind of the ability to read your hips, so he could really sync up the route in the sense of like, okay, receiver's kind of, maybe he's slowing down, or his hips starting to roll, he can kind of roll his coverage and then start to plant and drive and then get on top of it. But he was also predictable in the sense that if you would like press him at the top of the route, he was going to open his hips and then he could just sink back to the ball. He didn't have a lot of savvy there to, break on the football or just anticipate like this is not what's going to happen here, or he's going to do this, let me jump on the route. He does squeeze routes really well from half turn, and that improves his play speed and transitions. The issue, as I touched on, does not find a balance. Eye balance as a stem pushes vertical. You just don't see it bounce between receiver and quarterback. He did show the ability to sit, minimize his footwork, and stay disciplined with hips against Malik Neighbors here on this last play. He does all those things. Sits down, minimizing footwork at the top of the route, really speeding up that process, and then being able to get on this play. That's the ability. It just needs more consistency, especially when squared up in those spots. He also showed the ability to hold leverage for coverage in half turn. Here, that interception against Kentucky. Sinks his footwork well in half turn. His pad level stays down. He limits his footwork more consistently. That's why I think he's better there right now, and it's better than when he's square. Just that his footwork gets a little bit too footy to plant and drive. The technique gets loose to me, and there's some lack of anticipation there in those spots. So you can late press him on the play and create space against it, but he's very controlled to handle double moves consistently. So overall, this is an area that I just thought he was a plus player. I think that he brings the athleticism to bring more upside, and he brings the flash reps. Just don't think that he plays with the anticipation.
In off coverage, he's reactive. He has legitimate burst. I think if you can continue to minimize his footwork, or at very least help him get himself in a little more advantageous situations a little bit earlier, maybe preparation for the break. But then even in a play like this, like you can really see that short area burst where he kind of runs down Malik Neighbors in this spot out of the flip, that transition.
Or the consistent technique to really be great there right now. Zone coverage, I actually liked him more here than off-man coverage. Even though we saw less reps, so I guess it's fair to say that there's maybe a smaller sample size, it was just that I thought he was really good in zone coverage everywhere for the most part. Like, no matter what zone they threw him into, I thought he was capable. And at safety, he was very capable because he could open up his hips. He's very controlled in those spots. It was easy at safety. I mean, you could put this guy at safety, he'd probably look like, oh, you drafted him to be a safety. That makes sense. Like, you could do that, and he'd look natural there. His eyes immediately go into search mode once the route is passed off. So here against LSU in cover 4. Passes off his route, immediately he goes to search mode. Like, okay, let me find across the field. Vertical route, let me take that. It could be a tick late at times, but for the most part, as soon as his responsibility is gone, he's moving on to the next. He doesn't just float. Now, what I would like to see is that he would have, a little bit more vision through his target. So, like, my receivers here in zone coverage and then finding someone inside of that. We'll talk about that, but, like, a good example would be this. So, it's like he's getting tunnel vision here from the slot, for example, where maybe he's trying to find that number 3 receiver through the number 2 receiver. So, he's meshed on the number 2 receiver, but he's not finding that inside slot through that receiver against Texas A&M, for example. And because of that, you're getting a very tunnel vision approach where it's like he's playing his responsibility. He'll work off that as soon as he passes it, but maybe you don't get him overlapping his coverage necessarily early on the play until his assignment has actually left him. That's the biggest issue in zone coverage. Also some off-man coverage as well. He paces cover 4 half turns well, will be slow to kind of pull the trigger when working downhill when he has an over-top responsibility. He identifies drags to pass them off very quickly, as I touched on, kind of reading the release immediately. In cover 3, underneath, he is willing to dial it up, downhill aggression. We saw him blow up the screen against LSU when he has that opportunity. His hips are extremely fluid, and he's active, and he actively works through his responsibilities. So here, LSU, flat to corner awareness. The amount of plays where you see things like this, where it's like, oh, here's the wheel route, let me pick that up. Like his ability to kind of work through his zone and then pick up a route in his zone. The movement skills, underneath zone, wide zone, he wasn't limited. It's not like, oh, he's so long and he's kind of lacks some flexion, like you got to put him out wide in half turn. You can put him in a slot, and he looks normal. I mean, he just has that kind of flexibility. The transition movements are so good. Now, he will transition downhill a tick late, though, through teammates communication. I think that he plays a little bit more through understanding his responsibility than really with teammate communication. He communicates incredibly well, but it's like, hey, if a cornerback's telling him, hey, take the guy that went underneath, I'll take this vertically, he may wait to say that, hey, I know it's passing vertically, to dive underneath. Instead of just really just playing through teammate speed, he can pull his play speed a little bit back because he's playing through more so like his awareness. His awareness is great. I think he can speed that up at times, playing through more what his teammates are telling him and kind of just taking that and trusting it. His lateral sync and cover 2 from slot, we saw that against Kentucky. The lateral movement skills are there. He's fast to pass off vertical routes, push, and drop out. So if they push up vertically, he'll pass it off. He'll drop back out underneath. Now, he can get caught flowing into secondary zone without vision. This was the big issue. I didn't see it really cause him any issues, but it's the aspect of, like, after his first responsibility pass off, then he gets into his next one, or maybe he's just dropping back into his own area. Then he kind of loses where his receiver is. He kind of just drops to a spot. Maybe he's really just too focused on the quarterback here. Again, you don't get that eye balance. It's kind of the same thing from off-man, just in the opposite way. Now you lose eye balance, and now he's just focusing on the quarterback, and if the play breaks down, the quarterback starts to scramble around, you might get aspects where guys kind of open up a little bit late just because he doesn't find it immediately. He kind of just floats back into his zone spot. So I think that could be an issue just occasionally, and then again, getting tunnel vision at times. Finally, the other critical factor would be the ball skills. I believe that he's going to be awesome in this category. Now, you had a couple of PI calls. One of them I thought was whack. I don't know if it was a PI, but it was against Kentucky. I was like, that shouldn't have been a flag. The other one was against Georgia. A little bit handsy there. But to me, a lot of times it's kind of the same reason that it was called. He needs to avoid letting his pad stand up, and not getting in a strong position to hold ground. So you would have to grab at the top of the route. Very physical receivers would allow him to do that. If he allows his pads to kind of work high, he's not in strong positioning for the catch point, and at the same time, he's not in a balanced position, or maybe at the top of the route where they kind of push him off at the top because, again, he's not balanced, his feet aren't underneath him, his feet aren't in an opportunistic spot unless he's like going into the play with the awareness to do that. That's where you get catch point issues because at that point, now he gets forced to grab to kind of stick in the play because they're going to push off him, but it's natural for him, he has to grab to get back into the play because he's not in a proactive position in the lower body. That being said, he knows how to take the ball away. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands, shows ankle strength. To me, he shows really good ankle strength at the top of the route where if his position's more consistent, it's going to be really good there. He just needs to improve that positioning. Consistently finds your hands at the catch point. So even if he's not taking the ball away, he's going to find your hands at the catch point. He's going to play your hands, whether that's at the catch point, through the catch point, or taking it to your body, or also after receiver already caught the ball and then finding your hands. Like, it's like that Justin Coleman aspect where he always punched the ball out. This guy just has the ability to play angles directly to the football and go directly for that where that ball is going to hit your hands. And you love it. He's constantly just ripping the ball out. Even contested grabs, you walk away saying he gave up the reception, but my goodness, that guy had to work for it. He's just going to make you work all day long to pull the ball down and make you work in contested situations. He makes you battle. He has great tracking speed. We saw that on the interception where he's able to just kind of run under the football. It's very natural tracking speed. He's got safety tracking ability. Even when the ball doesn't get there in traffic, his focus doesn't go anywhere. He's extremely focused, dealing with contact, holding off a receiver, keeping contact, finding the football, only looking back to the quarterback when the receiver looks there, but also still being able to maintain contact without just becoming grabby, but actually still moving his feet. He has that ability to maintain an incredible focus while also dealing with traffic. Maybe another defender came into play and he's hitting somebody, but he still focuses on the football. He brings that like a receiver would tracking the football. I think that's going to make him really dangerous, taking the ball away. He's physical at pressing routes to the sideline, attempting to control the route. Great closing burst at the catch point with explosion to just leap on the ball with awesome angles to the ball, which makes it even better. And he has a sense for the ball, and it's just annoying at the catch point. He just has a sense like, oh, ball's in the air, let me go find it. Where's it at? This guy's going to take the football away. I think that ball skills is another area where it's my highest grade outside of what I think he's going to be as a press cornerback. Really, I think he's just going to take the ball away. 5 interceptions says a lot of that, but I don't think it says everything. The dude is a problem. This is why I thought he was the best cornerback, because he hits every critical factor. He takes the ball away. Reactive athleticism. He plays way faster than his plays. I think he's a very good play speed. His run support, this is why I loved him. This is what separated him for me as a Lions fit versus other cornerbacks that I like too. It was run support. Inside hands-on contact for receiver blocks. You play with fast hands, consistent, boom. The only issue that you would see is when bigger receivers, like we saw it against USF, when bigger receivers would be able to control him a little bit, and he didn't always carry, it seemed like that some of that core strength to actually shed or gain ground or the position that he really wanted. That was the only time I saw that ever pop as an issue, and it was a big receiver that he was matched up against. But for the most part, fast hands, consistent inside hands. Now, he can enter a little bit high, which is one thing you do see, but he gets square into contact, and he's controlled into the block. He amps up his aggressiveness versus running short yardage situations. You saw it on this Georgia stop on the outside run, short yardage run, shuts it down. He plays with awesome discipline on the backside. You'll also see the willingness to stick his nose in. He'll play in the box with no problem. Here, you'll also see where you get some of the hit and miss tackle results. I think in traffic, where he'll change up his approach, which I do love, you will occasionally get him kind of throwing his shoulder just with another defender around. He doesn't really fully wrap up. That gives issues, or he'll tackle too high. He'll just straight up tackle too high. Maybe it's leakage. Maybe it's also the fact that the guy just can kind of stand there a little bit longer if it's a quarterback and he doesn't get that immediate sack. He will tackle too high, and sometimes he doesn't always drop his pad level the right way. I think, again, he doesn't carry some of the elite bend where he can kind of just scoop around blocks, so he's going to kindly hit his knee. Consistently, here's my favorite part as a run defender. Consistently gets the outside shoulder clean. Consistently get my outside shoulder clean. Get my outside shoulder clean. I want to protect the edge. I'm going to get that outside shoulder clean no matter who's blocking me. Offensive lineman, tight end, receiver. I'm getting my outside shoulder clean. I'm getting in a hurry because I'm going to have my hands there. I'm going to play with that kind of discipline that he's responsible for. His open field technique, he looks like a safety. He plays like a safety here, and that's a really good thing because safety's last line defense, that's their responsibility. His open field technique is reliable, although it's occasionally passive, and occasionally you won't get him like, okay, just hit him, right? Like, okay, your target's there, go through the tackle, make the tackle. Instead, it could be a little bit passive. I think that could lead to issues because you'll get the late movement where he'll kind of fall down to a knee again. He'll kind of have to be forced to wrap, and it's not always pretty. But for the most part, you're going to get a very controlled guy in open space, and it may show up less as a cornerback, but as a safety, he looks like a safety. It looks like a safety would. And as a blitzing corner, I don't think he's elite here. I don't think he's maybe a game changer. I think Brian Branch is a much better blitzing corner coming out. That being said, though, he's controlled. He typically hides it pretty well. He's controlled for pass lanes. He finds running backs on play action. He doesn't just sell out, so there's a control about him. He doesn't really have a plan for running backs typically. However, he did flash a good little move against Kentucky with some of the shake and some of that burst. It's often when he's in the slot position only because he doesn't have some of that long speed to come from a little bit further, but he does take great pass to the quarterback in the sense of, I think with some of that ankle strength, he'll play through kind of like half man, trying not to allow himself to just get ran out of the pocket. He doesn't always get there fast enough. He doesn't always show some of the closing speed. I think that's just a plus. I don't think he's great to get there fast enough, but he doesn't really pull himself out of the play as a blitzer. And then finally, the football intelligence that he carries, controlled passing off routes, switching off slot routes. Ole Miss did run some scheme beaters. Shout out to they have a good offensive mind over there. They had some scheme beaters, and I thought that he played really to what they were supposed to do, like what their defense responsibilities were, outside of maybe the structure of the scheme, and they allowed some things to happen there. And I also think that at times he gets a little bit tunnel vision in half turn or maybe playing through multiple receivers. But that being said, he plays with a safety's discipline. We saw it against Mississippi State, as I touched on. He improved every single game, it felt like. His best game, I thought, was against LSU. His worst one that I thought I saw was against Tennessee. That being said, though, he was adaptive. I think his awareness is incredibly impressive in every aspect, and I was not expecting that, just passing off routes. The amount of examples I can show you is insane. Incredible body movement, which is massive for a corner, and also that control. And overall, the grades that I end up giving it to this player across the board, I think he's a great reactive athlete. I think he plays with very good play speed and pressing elite category in terms of ball skills. Again, some upside there and press man coverage that I'm betting on, but that's okay with me. I'm willing to bet on those things. Off man, I think he's a plus. This could be slightly high of a grade here. I honestly could drop this one a tad, but I do think that he's shown enough flashes for me to put it here. I just don't see the anticipation. That does concern me a little bit, but as a former safety, I think there's more things to be optimistic about with this area. Like, he definitely has a skill set to be better here. His plant and dry burst is not incredible. I think he has good short area burst, but it's not going to be incredible or extremely dynamic. So he still may not have, the highest upside here either. I think his zone coverage is very good as well. His slot coverage, to me, this is an area where he's very capable. I don't think you'll want him to live there, but he's very capable. He just needs to, again, be more aware of, like, hey, I have to close. I have to be a lot tighter in airspace in each spot. But he's very controlled. The footwork is awesome from these spots. He's willing to tackle, and he communicates pretty well here, and it's just the awareness. He passes off routes with ease. Transition abilities, again, the other area that I think that was special when I thought coming into the draft. I think that carried over. The football intelligence is great. Great mental toughness, really reliable open field tackler. The play strength is a little bit more average for me in that sense, but as run support, I thought that he was, again, pressing a great grade in this category for me. That's one thing that I remember during the chat was like when we took Arnold, people were like, yo, he don't tackle. I'm like, what the heck? What are y'all watching? Terrion Arnold don't tackle. First off, he's a Bama corner. Of course he's going to tackle. But number two, this guy tackles. He tackles. Really does tackle. The myth has been busted, okay? This myth will not go on any longer. If anybody believes this guy doesn't want to tackle, stop it. But seriously, it's also then the upside for special teams value. Now, I'd probably like him more on certain units where maybe it is more of kind of that jammer role or in a protecting role specifically. Heck, he had the one kick return. He looked dynamic there. You could probably play him on punt team, have him go track somebody down because he'll tackle. He's not going to play on special teams likely at all. But like Jameson Williams, remember the fact that he played on special teams and he was willing to do it and he was successful there and the Lions were like, yo, that's awesome. Even though he's not going to do it here, but, I mean, that is how he got his start. I guess technically he did play on special teams for us to just kind of get reps. This guy could play on special teams, and he could be very good there. You could put him on field goal block if you wanted to. Now, that's something that you could actually ask him to do. You really could because he seems very effective in those spots, just working the corner. That being said, though, probably won't play much special teams at all, but he could. And that's the kind of guy that the Lions are going to love. So overall, I absolutely love this player. Still, my top cornerback in this year's draft. I think the Lions landed an absolute dog. It's not all about what he is right now, but I'll tell you what, right now, he's a very darn good cornerback. And in short time, watch out for this man. Just watch out for this dude. Lions finally have put a guy in the building to develop. And then they went back in the second round and did it again. I absolutely love it. Lions got a dog here. Incredible draft pick. They nailed this one. This player is big time. He's special. Terrion Arnold, I'm happy you were a Lion. Let me know your thoughts and comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.